Welcome to Season 2, Episode 3, Cut to Chase, the official podcast of Cempaka Cut, the filmmaking society of Cempaka International Schools. Now, with all that said and done, let's actually get to the interesting thing. Today we're gonna talk about something that's like I'm sure everyone has at least participated in some way or form. Even if you think, hey, what is this? Maybe I haven't done it. Yeah, you probably have in some way or form. And that is slacktivism. So what is it? Quite simple. Have you ever seen any form of social movement? Anything calling for awareness over the past 2 years, especially in the last like 8 or 9 months? And definitely you've participated in it in some way. Unless like you don't use social media at all, which is like you probably wouldn't know about us if that were the case. So I don't think so. Um, what this means to say is this is probably going to be something that since you participated in, you are likely going to gain a reflective overview of what is this? Is it good? Is it bad? We're going to see some of the impact it's done. How can we improve it to make sure that some of the bad goes away while still keeping the good, and we can make the world a better place one step at a time.
Yep. So we're gonna get into like the basic definition of slacktivism, which is when people support a cause by like performing simple measures such as signing petitions or like sharing posts to their stories, for example, but they're not actually engaged in a cause, or they're not truly devoted in like to making a change, right? Like I know like this definition like sounds pretty bad. We're gonna explain why this isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? And like in today's day and age, mostly with like online culture, and especially because COVID is going on, we can't exactly like go out. Like the definition of slacktivism has sort of moved towards like being part of like an online community, or like it in part it's like part of like social media in general, right? It's not like like what people tend to associate with slacktivism, right? So yeah, that's basically what we're going to cover today, and we're also going to like look at why it's so popular in the first place. I think that especially in the past like 8 to 9 months, or like yeah, sorry, like a year basically, like there has been like we've seen increases in slacktivism, right? We've seen people sharing this to their posts, like posting black squares on their page, right? And we've seen petitions being signed, or like more hashtags being spread and stuff. And why is that necessarily something that is like so popular right now? I think when we're all stuck at home, and that when we don't have like an ability for you to get that satisfaction from actually taking change on the streets, for example. I think the dangerous thing is that when you have stativism and you have the fact that, oh, I get satisfaction from doing this thing, or like sharing this post, and I get like that dopamine rush or whatever. Like when you have that, and like you don't necessarily have the ability to go out and actually make proper change, you get the satisfaction of activism without actually making proper change, right? And like that's like one major reason why people like partake in activism in the first place. But the second is also the idea that, oh, my entire community is doing it, just the idea of like peer pressure, virtue signaling, performative activism, all that stuff. It seems like, oh, it's a must to, I don't know, support BLM, and like post something about BLM. It's a must to show my support without actually like truly being engaged in the cause, right? So that's probably like two main reasons why it's so popular, I think. And Umar, do you want to talk about why this is could be a bad thing?
Yeah. So like of course participating in these things are good, breed awareness, good. The problem is that things can be improved. And that's not to say that things right now are bad. Like it's just inherently bad that there's no pros out of it, everything that happens. The problem is that when you stall progress, but everyone else is illusioned to believing that progress is happening at a rate faster than it actually is. At this image that specifically says that look, things are happening, things are getting better. The problem is that specifically when it doesn't, when it's easy to feel like things are being changed when you see huge mass numbers. I think the main problem already of this is people think that accessibility is something that's good. The problem is that when accessibility becomes justification for like not wanting to do more. Now the question here is, if people are able to so easily opt into doing protests, to doing these things that like are supposed to be more superior forms of activism in the ways that they garner greater social change and require like higher entry into making these things happen in the first place. Like, yeah, so assuming that people can enter into them, why would they, when Slacktivism is there as the easy platform to do it? But what if they can't? So what about people who just wouldn't want to march on the streets, or just wouldn't donate to it? So that's not to say that Slacktivism is making these people like who wouldn't want to now, like the absence of Slacktivism means that people who don't participate in protests would now protest. But it means that for certain people who could not traditionally participate in them, now at least have a new avenue to do that. That's a good thing at the point where people have like zero ability to affect things when it comes to like, okay, I'm not gonna protest anyway, but at least now I'm able to spread the awareness, sending it to like more people, or the way that like algorithms work just by sheer popularity of how many shares that goes things, that single post is going to become like more popular, more likely to be shown to the mainstream, when you're seeing by the metrics of how many people are sharing, how many people are liking, how many people are commenting, how many people are saving based on like different platforms, different metrics for it. But these are some ways that people can participate in ways that if otherwise they were locked out, they would be able to do it. But for the people that could have the capacity to participate in these things, there's like the presence of Slacktivism is a disincentive from doing it, but it also exists both ways. So yeah, actually, we're not assuming a perfect world where people are just going to be tuned off entirely from doing nothing and suddenly going to become marchers on the streets every day. But there's a significant portion both ways, where maybe some people will actually be more engaged, and some people who can't do anything at all, at least now they are doing something as opposed to nothing. So that's the way it could be seen. Correct. So as mentioned before, it's quite unrealistic to expect like every single person to be marching on the streets. Now, for those people who can't do it, then what's their participation in the movement? Like, are they just gonna like sit on the sidelines and just do nothing? So, in the absence of slacktivism, that's probably going to be what the world looks like. At least right now, they're able to affect change in a few ways. One, like things already mentioned, like by sharing these posts. Number two, when it comes to petitions, like the effectiveness of petitions are like can be questioned. Like how many of them actually lead to the outcomes that they present, how many of them actually reach towards the people that they are trying to show the petition to and say, look, this is how many millions of people have signed to make sure that this change happens. Look, this means that with enough public support for these things to happen, this is probably a strong reason why you should change these things if you haven't already seen all the harm that it's causing. So that's one way. In that slacktivism is not just limited to sharing posts, it also leads to minimal effort things. And so therefore it's just not seen as something like haha, we're just sharing posts. Like you can still do like little forms of petitions, you can still like comment on things. Like obviously in a perfect world where everyone is able to march on the streets, where everyone is able to donate amounts of their money from their incomes to these things, that's like sure that would be good, but many people can't do it. So in with this context in mind, I think war and slacktivism can be improved. Now, all the harms that you talk about just now will probably still exist and will never eradicate like every harmful thing about slacktivism. But what you're able to do is at least make the process better, more accessible, yet still at the same time making sure you maximize the effectiveness of these things. So when it comes to obviously there's just really like harmful things like Sudan meal project. Like that one was obviously a scam. But that means it's not to say that just because of Sudan meal project you should now completely disengage on social media activism. Like there's a couple of things to note here. One, just looking towards the sources of who these people are. Now, there was just good like resources and accounts during this time where Sudan Meal Project and other people looking to maliciously capitalize off like the sufferings of people, use it to their own advantage. Like these people were exposed. They gave mechanisms as to how you're able to find these things. Like look at the past history of the account. Look at who are the people running this account, where are they getting their funds from, especially if they are trying to claim like ridiculous outcomes of like a post share is going to lead to $1 for like meals in Sudan. How are they going to transport meals into Sudan when at a time where the government is cracking down on the people? Like these things you have to, although it sounds good in nature and there definitely are good hearted people in the world, we can't discount that, but we need to start questioning as to whether these things are possible, whether these things are likely to happen. And obviously, you can just read up on these things. You can also find other resources questioning these things, and there's obviously going to be like mainstream forms of donation. So just don't donate to like a random page that isn't verified or isn't endorsed by the official leaders of the movement or people who have worked as experts on the movement. So definitely are ways to prevent these things. It's not something that it's just it's integrated there and can't be removed. Like we're like a surgeon. We can remove that. Yeah.
That makes sense. And I think, like, especially, with like there is, I think, some negative connotation when it comes to selectivism, the idea like, oh, blackout Tuesday, for example, is like how it washes out the voice, or like drowns out the voices of like actual media and stuff like that, right? Because like you just have like entire pages just full of black squares, for example, or like there's negative connotations with, oh, celebrities who actually have the political capital or financial capital to actually make change, you know choosing instead to engage with activism by just like sharing posts or like tweeting out something and saying, oh, this is disgusting, without like any other further action, right? I think that with that like negative connotation, it's going to be very hard to actually think of slacktivism as something that can be improved. But the problem with that, like, um I think the problem with that in general is that when you have selectivism as a key element and as something that isn't going to like be removed anytime soon, like whether we like it or not, the best thing we can do right now is identify the pros of it and what we can actually use to improve on it, like Umar said, right? I think it's also about the fact that you are giving an avenue for people, like on the counter narrative, like when you give people an ability to be aware of these things, they might be more likely to go out on the street now that they know about it. It sort of, like gives them a gateway into, a larger group. For example, like they are now more likely to go into the streets, and we see this with BLM, right? I think that when you have like movements like this that gain traction, for example, on like, it's not just like on Instagram, like on TikTok or like on Twitter and stuff like that. I think that when you see these things and you hear like the stories of like these people who go out to protest, and you are like sharing these stories, you might be more incentivized to actually go out there and protest, right? Like for example, the United States. And like we see the activism like with the Me Too movement as well. Like the fact that hashtags are being shared, and like even though you might not have your own story to share, you still are able to give people a platform to talk about these things. It can actually lead to real world change, and it's not something to be discounted. I think it's true that you can disengage from a cause, but as long as you have already set out like that precedence for other people to then share or like make more people aware of, that is better than nothing, right? Especially for these people who wouldn't have protests in the first place or wouldn't have been engaged in social issues in the first place. I think that that is something that we should be looking out for, and should be something that we can monitor and should monitor, basically.
Yeah, I mean, even if we don't get, entire policy changes, we don't dismantle government structures entirely. You don't have to change the world in order for change to be there. Let's just say that change occurs on a spectrum. We shouldn't discount the tiny bits that happen. Or even things like you changing the mind of a person. Like person who was traditionally engaged in like anti-feminist actions. Maybe not intentionally, but just as a result of a lack of understanding and education that they wouldn't have gotten as a result of like if slacktivism didn't exist, because like social media is something that most people already use. So if things that aren't traditionally covered in big media or other forms of like traditional media that people already are starting to, their interest in these things are waning, the amount of time they spend on like television and cable are like decreasing, or radio decreasing. Most people are on social media, so it's fair to say that they're able to gain some form of insights into these things. And as more people are becoming accepting of social media, less of like a fad, and I think everyone has gone past the stage where it's a fad. Even like platforms like TikTok have been gaining traction and no more a fad, when you see like to the point where everyone is getting onto these things already. They're able to learn things, they're able to educate themselves, even if you don't need completely changing structures once again. Sometimes these people just feeling empowered to share their stories, and people who change their minds after realizing that there's two sides to this, that maybe the narratives that they were fed into as a child by the people around them were questionable. They're not set in stone. That we can challenge these types of things if they are harmful. We can challenge conventional norms if they are harmful. And the way they were able to do this is through accessible posts to social media, that people are able to look at these things and understand the problems. They don't require huge amounts of like academic understanding of like social sciences. It just requires you to learn something right, something wrong, and this is how we all change them. That's one way we're able to help people. Even if we don't completely change systems, even just someone feeling more empowered by sharing their story, or someone now knowing that microaggressions towards like other minority groups are bad, and they change their ways so that they help be more accepting towards people. That in itself is already a victory on a personal level, and changes the lives of so many people already.
Yeah. But I think it's also dangerous, like it's important that you don't get to like slippery slope of, oh, now slacktivism is a replacement for actual activism. Right? I think that like slacktivism should be seen as an avenue to actual like change and proper things that you can actually do. Like donations obviously are like a big thing, right? Or like even things like writing an open letter to local MP and stuff like that. These are things that can't be discounted in the long run as being able to be like replaced by slacktivism and sharing posts. So like for example, if you look like hashtags like like Save Our Girls, which was mainly like a movement to save like 200 girls who had been kidnapped, right? I think like when you like even when celebrities were sharing it and they say, oh wow, this was like such a success, so many people garnered awareness, as Umar said, right? It's important to see that these things actually lead to real world change, because even though the awareness was there, the change wasn't. Like the girls who were still kidnapped, like still remain kidnapped, right? There was no actual change by governments. There was no actual change by like the people who shared this info, for example, or garnered awareness. So it's important that when you share, you also like understand your intentions. Look at the sources. Are the sources that you are sharing credible or useful? Are you going to like be able to actually disconnect and speak out against things like that when you see, for example, a racist person, or like you have a racist family member? Are you going to be able to confront them about that? Are you going to be able to even offline, or like when you disconnect from your like social media pages, are you going to be able to make that change? I think that's something that is important to me, and it's something that Slacktivism can definitely lead to, but it's also something that has to be like an intrinsic thing. Like it has to come like from you personally. Like for example, like look at the sources that you're sharing. Are you sharing like donation links, or are you sharing are you sharing like stuff that isn't going to be useful for the community, right? I think that when you are more aware of these things, even the smallest things, Slacktivism can be effective and will be more effective. So, yeah.
Correct. It's important that that people actually ought to change. Not have to say these things to say that I am now an ally for African Americans. Obviously, you have to show that in the way that you act. Like you have to personally confront people that even if you say on your story like you've been doing changes there, you also have to personally overcome the biases that you have and fight against the prejudices that other people around you have, seeing as these are the people that's immediately around you. And the reason for this is simple. I think it's a prerequisite that you change yourself and the others around you on a personal level before you are able to get any form of societal change. Because otherwise, how are we going to be able to garner the support for these things? How are we going to show that these things really matter if we do not take it into our own moral values and adopt these things as part of how we act as people, not just because we want to be seen as heroes, not because we want to be seen as people who are the pioneers of greatness for other individuals, but just because we want to be a good moral person. I think this is something that all people have to take in mind. Like it's not enough to just post about these things. You also have to adopt these things into your routine, to how you act towards other people. So these things also force you to reflect. And obviously, understandably, maybe some people might mess up once in a while. They might not get it the first few times, but otherwise, that's the whole value of it, right? If you're going to want to convince higher ups who aren't already persuaded, and you are someone who has seen firsthand the types of discrimination, the types of like harms these things perpetuate, then if you can't do it yourself, why should other people do it? So make sure that you also adopt all these things as part of who you are, because you want to be a good person, not because of anything else.
Yeah, and I think that when you post things, or like when you want to like actively engage in Slacktivism, just remember to question your intentions. Like, are your intentions like to feel good, or are you pressured by other people to do this, or are your intentions to help the community out? Is it your intention to raise awareness? Like, I think when you are aware of your intentions, that is when you're able to do things in this situation. And like actually there is really good stuff that has happened like from Slacktivism. Don't get me wrong. Don't think that all Slacktivists are just like lazy activists who do things, right? I think like for example in the wake of the shooting that killed like 6 Asian women, the fact that these platforms were given for families of these women to actually speak out and say we need help for rent, for example, or we need could you donate to this thing? And the very fact that social media has like helped accelerate, or has acted as a catalyst for sharing these like links, you are actually going to be able to donate stuff and like actually have people who are able to donate, right? So it's like incredible how much was raised. It was like 2 million for like one family, like just by just constantly sharing it. Like even if like one person is only able to donate $1, for example, if you reach it out to 2 million, like that changes there. We're seeing it like all over social media. So yeah, definitely don't discount the power of Slacktivism. Don't see it as purely an it's definitely something that can work if you as an activist, if you choose to. So yeah. So Umar, thoughts on why it's especially significant for teenagers, people on social media now, especially in Korea.
Yep, correct. So obviously, it's just violating SOPs, and even if there aren't SOPs in place, which kind of like links back to our first episode, nice throwback there. But like, you're just, normal protesting just doesn't work. We have to find new ways to adapt, and this is how like we've done it. And so far, I guess it's worked out. That's not to say it's perfect, it solved everything. And I don't think that's a fair metric to place on any form of activism, to say that, there's still certain things that you haven't solved. There's still certain things that lost out as a result of you not being able to fulfill the burdens you have as a social movement. I think it's more about where you best utilize the resources that you have, best garner change on not only like an overall societal level, but also how you affect the moral compass of people and make them want to change from within. So all these things can also happen, but specifically on social media, where more people are going there nowadays, where everyone is just utilizing this as part of their daily lives. It's incredibly important that you go on towards these things in ways that people who just don't watch traditional media wouldn't have. So also it tends to like bypass like global borders. Let's just say that like everyone around the world uses like social media, and with the exception of like huge like media that spans like different countries. I mean, things like the Washington Post, like the Economist. Like most of these issues are tend to be like localized news networks as well. But now you're able to like go beyond that as a result of like social media. It's like really really global this time. Like especially when you have like activism pages that way of like followings from like all over the globe. Like these are also some benefits that we can't discount. It's still something that's quite important. Yeah. Make sure you remember that.
Yeah, so the idea that social media is ability for you to globalize or like tell other people from like around the globe about your issues, like local issues and stuff. The fact that it's so universal and like anyone can help, right? Like regardless of where you are, there are no barriers of entry. That's something that is important to know, and it's something that can be weaponized to your advantage when you want to like look at proper change and actual change, right? So Umar, any final thoughts on slacktivism and your, what's your personal take on it?
Yeah, so once again, it's not perfect, but it doesn't have to be. Don't try to put it as your like primary method of like activism. Like I mean, sure you can, but I think insofar as you have different alternatives, try to use those as well. Can have the discussions about the merits and demerits of different types of things. Make sure that you constantly reflect on these things as well, because like you don't want to restrict yourself sticking to one platform and like not wanting to change just because that's something you stuck for a long time. Like you have to be open to moving with things along with where the population goes as well. That's how we able to view these things. Stacktivism isn't perfect, it definitely isn't, but it's able to do a lot of things. And I think we as a society, knowing that lots of people here want to do good things in the world, take the extra effort to learn how to do your slacktivism properly. Like make sure you are promoting the right causes, make sure you're having information that's up to date and accurate, make sure that people who might spread like fake news, both intentionally or unintentionally, make sure you're able to filter through what's like true, what's not. And overall, as long as you're able to do some good in the world, like just never stop doing good. Like love the world, everyone deserves a chance, and so you gotta give it your all.
Yeah, that's like a excellent way to end it on that, that positive high note. Just as a conclusion, yeah, make sure that you do your activism right. Make sure that you're up to date, and make sure that it doesn't become a replacement for traditional activism and things that can actually lead to real world change. And with that, I think we're gonna end this episode. Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below, and we will see you in next episode. We'll be having a special episode really, really soon. So let's just keep that in mind. And with that, we'll end the episode here. Okay.
Yep, thanks to everyone, and we'll see you very soon. Yeah. Okay. Love the tree, save the turtles, donate to your nearest refugee school today.
Yep.